Stories at Work.
You're watching Stories at Work. Today we're breaking down a dramatized and fictional story from the world of IT and logistics. I was still technically employed when they started erasing me. Not fired, not even warned, just quietly removed from the parts of the company that made me useful. It began with little things you could almost explain away if you wanted to stay comfortable. My calendar stopped syncing. Meeting invites that used to appear automatically, risk reviews, carrier escalations, the weekly ops bridge, just didn't show up anymore. I'd hear about them later in passing, like I'd missed a train I didn't know was coming. Then my ticket queue changed. I was a junior ops analyst at a mid-sized logistics tech company called Northline Relay. Not a glamorous job, mostly dashboards, shipping exceptions, vendor coordination, and the part nobody applauds, proving what happened when something went wrong. That last part was my lane. When a shipment went missing, people didn't want feelings. They wanted evidence, scanned times, chain of custody, who touched it, when, where it deviated, what vendor had custody, what policy applied, what the contract said. I wasn't the loudest person on the floor. I wasn't the funniest. I wasn't anyone's vibe, but I was the one who could open a dispute and end it with a clean packet that made everyone stop talking. For a while, that mattered. Northline had built this internal tool years back, ugly, clunky, and unbelievably useful. It was called Vessel Tag. Nobody marketed it. Nobody bragged about it. It didn't look good in a demo. But it did one thing better than anything else we had. It took messy shipment data and turned it into a timeline you could defend. I'd inherited it from a senior analyst who left. He handed it to me like it was a slightly embarrassing family heirloom. "Don't let them kill it," he told me on his last day, half joking. I promised I wouldn't. And for about a year, I kept that promise. Vessel Tag wasn't magic. It didn't predict the future. It just forced the truth to stay consistent. It pulled scans from carriers, internal handoffs, customer service notes, and vendor updates into one stitched sequence. If a warehouse forgot to scan, it showed. If a driver claimed delivery, but the GPS ping didn't match, it showed. If someone backdated a status to make an SLA report look clean, it showed that too. That last part is what got me in trouble, because Northline didn't just ship packages, we shipped optics. A new manager arrived in late spring, Blaine Harker. He was one of those people who walked in like the air belonged to him, the kind of guy who used the word alignment as a weapon. First week, he smiled at everyone. Second week, he started calling private one-on-ones. Third week, the culture talk began. I tried to be neutral. I kept my head down. I did what juniors do when they're trying to survive. Hit the numbers, close tickets, don't complain. The thing is, the numbers were lying, not outright. Not in a way you could point to with one screenshot, but enough that anyone who lived in the data could feel it. We had a high-profile onboarding at the time, Marrowgate imports, big volume, tight delivery windows, and contract language that made our legal team twitch. Proof of chain clauses, dispute response time requirements, penalties that scaled fast. Leadership wanted the onboarding story to look clean. Vessel Tag kept flagging exceptions, not because the world was ending, because the world is always messy in logistics. But the flags showed patterns, real ones, the kind that needed fixes, not cover. I raised it the normal way, in a weekly ops review with numbers and examples. Calm voice, no drama, just, "These are recurring. This is the exposure. Here's what we need to correct." Blaine listened, like he cared. Then after the meeting, he walked up to my desk and rested his hand on the back of my chair, like he was doing me a favor. "Soren," he said, smiling, "you're smart. But you're going too deep." "I'm showing the exceptions," I said. "It's what the contract—" He held up a finger like I was a kid interrupting. "We don't win by drowning leadership in details. We win by telling a simple story." I remember the way he said story, like truth was optional. After that, my access started shrinking. At first, it was subtle. A dashboard I used daily suddenly required a permission request. A shared drive folder became restricted. I'd go to pull an old dispute packet and hit an error message, then get a Slack from a coworker. "Hey, did you lose access too?" I asked my team lead. He avoided my eyes and said, "IT's tightening things up. Don't take it personal." That's another phrase people use when it is personal. Then Blaine scheduled a one-on-one with me in a glass conference room at 9 in the morning. He sat across from me with a notebook open, but he didn't write anything. He asked me how I was finding the culture. I said I was focused on the work. He nodded like that was the wrong answer. He told me I had a tone issue, that I was overly technical in meetings, that I made other people feel called out when I flagged problems. I stared at him for a second, waiting for the real topic to arrive. It didn't. That was the topic. I asked carefully, "So, what's the expectation? That I don't bring up the flags?" He leaned back and gave me a look like I'd finally understood something obvious. "I'm saying," he replied, "you need to learn what matters and what doesn't." I left that room feeling like I'd stepped into a different company. Over the next week, tasks I'd owned got reassigned without a word. I'd see my ticket notes copied into someone else's update. My name removed from the thread. Sometimes they didn't even change the phrasing, just pasted my work, cleaned my name off it, and hit send. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't imagining it. It was visible. It was systematic. And still, I didn't blow up. Because in corporate life, the person who reacts first is the person they label unstable. So I did what I always did. I documented. I saved meeting summaries. I took screenshots of permission errors. I exported ticket histories. Not because I planned revenge, because I could feel the ground shifting and I needed traction. When you're junior, you learn quickly. People don't protect you. Records do. 2 weeks later, an HR invite hit my inbox. Check in. That word again. Soft. Harmless. The kind of title that makes you lower your guard. I walked into the HR office and saw Blaine sitting there already, legs crossed, smiling like it was a networking lunch. HR, her name was Celine, spoke in that careful tone people use when they're reading off policy. They were restructuring. My role was no longer aligned. They appreciated my contribution. They were offering a separation package. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I asked one question. Is this termination for cause? Celine blinked like she hadn't expected me to know the difference. No, she said, not for cause. Blaine added like he couldn't help himself. We're just moving in a direction that's more cohesive. Cohesive. Another word that means quieter. They slid the paperwork across the table. I read it slowly. Not because I thought I could change their minds. Because the only leverage you have in a room like that is your calm. I signed nothing. I said I'd review it. Blaine's smile tightened a fraction. Celine told me my access would remain until end of day, so I could transition cleanly. I nodded, thanked them, and walked out. Back at my desk, I didn't do what they probably expected. Pack immediately, cry in the bathroom, send desperate emails. I opened Vessel Tag. The dashboard loaded. A few new exceptions blinked at me like warning lights. The Marrowgate onboarding was already slipping. I stared at the flags and felt something heavy settle in my chest. Not fear, not anger yet, just a cold understanding. They weren't pushing me out because I was bad. They were pushing me out because the system I kept alive kept telling the truth at the wrong time. By mid-afternoon, my coworker Jessa slid into my chat. "Are you okay?" she typed. I replied, "I'm fine." I wasn't fine, but I was controlled. I spent the rest of the day exporting what I was allowed to export, the way you cleanly leave a place that's trying to pretend you never mattered. At 5, my badge still worked. At 5:30, it didn't. The light turned red. I stood in front of the turnstile with a cardboard box in my hands. Keyboard, mug, a worn notebook, and watched people flow past me like I was already a ghost. A security guard walked over, not aggressive, just uncomfortable. Sorry, man, he muttered. They told us to deactivate it. I nodded and stepped aside to let others through. It was that kind of exit. Quiet, efficient, designed to make you disappear without a scene. I walked out to the parking lot, put the box in my car, and sat there for a minute with my hands on the steering wheel. I could have driven home, but something made me go back in, not through the turnstile, obviously, through the side entrance that opened to the loading corridor, where facilities and IT had their storage. I still had enough access to the building perimeter to reach it. Not for long, I could feel that. The corridor smelled like dust and tape adhesive. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A stack of decommissioned monitors leaned against the wall like tired soldiers. And there it was, the disposal shelf everyone joked about. Old routers, broken headsets, cracked laptops, boxes labeled scrap. A clipboard taped to the side with a printed list of items marked for donation or recycle. My eyes skimmed the list without thinking. Then one line made my stomach tighten. Vessel tag. Archived. I looked up and saw a thin plastic case sitting on top of a box, half hidden under a coil of Ethernet cable. It had the same label. Someone had printed it like it was trash. I picked it up. It felt light, insignificant, almost insulting. A guy from IT, Rami, walked in as I was standing there. He froze when he saw me. "Yo," he said, cautious. "I thought you were gone." "Badge went red," I replied. "I'm just grabbing my last stuff." He nodded toward the shelf. "That's all scrap, basically." I held up the case. "What's this?" Rami squinted. "Oh, that old thing. They told us to archive it. Nobody uses it. We're cleaning the closet." I stared at the label. My voice came out even. "Can I take it?" Rami laughed once, like I'd asked for a broken chair. "Soren, it's worthless. Can I take it?" I repeated. He shrugged. "I mean, sure. Facilities wants a donation for anything that leaves. Technically. $5, I think, goes to the employee fund. $5. I reached into my wallet. My hands didn't shake. I didn't make a speech. I paid $5. Rami scribbled something on the clipboard. He tore off a little receipt stub and handed it to me. It wasn't fancy. Just date, item description, and his signature. But it existed, and that mattered. I walked to my car with my box in one hand and the plastic case in the other, like I was carrying something fragile. Not because it was precious, because I knew what it represented. Inside that worthless archive was the one thing Blaine couldn't stand, a system that made the truth easy to prove. I put it on the passenger seat and stared at it for a long moment. Then I started the engine. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. They had just sold me the one asset they couldn't afford to lose. The first week after I left, I told myself to let it go. That's what everyone says you should do, right? Don't dwell, new chapter, bigger things. People love those lines because they sound clean. Like you can rinse humiliation off with a motivational quote. But the truth was, I didn't have the luxury of clean. I had rent, I had student loans, I had a resume that now had a weird polite gap where Northline Relay would confirm dates of employment and nothing else. And I had that plastic case on my kitchen table like a dare. Vessel tag, worthless, they said. I didn't even open it the first night. I just stared at it while my laptop booted up and my inbox refreshed with rejection emails from jobs I'd applied to before I got pushed out. By day 3, the anger finally found its way out of my chest and into my hands. I opened the archive, not the way people imagine when they think of stolen code or dramatic corporate espionage. There was nothing exciting about it. No blinking red alarms, no secret passwords, just old files and documentation, the kind you only appreciate if you've ever been the person who had to rebuild something from scratch. While everyone above you pretended it was simple. The first thing I found was a folder labeled Handoff. Inside it, integration notes, basic schemas, vendor mappings, and a plain text file that made me exhale through my nose. Because whoever wrote it my old senior analyst probably, had basically left a warning in black and white. If you remove exception stitching, you will lose dispute defensibility. In other words, if they killed vessel tag, they weren't just killing a dashboard, they were killing their ability to prove anything. I sat there in my apartment and felt that weird mix of vindication and nausea. Vindication because I'd been right. Nausea because I knew exactly what would happen next. Northline wasn't going to collapse overnight. Companies like that don't. They wobble first. They blame vendors. They blame the economy. They blame bad luck. They blame everyone except the decisions that caused the wobble. And while they did that, the same mess would keep landing on customers, on warehouse workers, on drivers, on support reps who weren't allowed to tell the truth. I should have closed the laptop and walked away. Instead, I started making a list. Not a revenge list, not names with red circles, just a boring, structured list of what vessel tag actually did, what parts mattered, what a rebuild would realistically require. I wrote it like a junior again, methodical, humble, almost apologetic. 1. Ingest carrier scan events. 2. Normalize vendor timestamps. 3. Stitch chain of custody into a defensible timeline. 4. Produce a dispute packet with consistent evidence. And then I wrote a question I couldn't shake. If this was worthless to them, why did it feel like it could be valuable to someone else? That's when I did the first thing that made my pride sting. I looked up how many mid-sized logistics firms were quietly bleeding money on disputes. I didn't need fancy market research. I just needed to read the forums and trade posts where ops people complain when they think nobody important is listening. Chargebacks, missing proof. Carrier says delivered. Customer says they didn't get it. SLA penalties. Vendor blame loops. It was the same story everywhere. The pain was real, the fix wasn't glamorous, and that meant most companies ignored it until it became a crisis. I sat back in my chair and realized something that hit like a small punch. Northline didn't fire me because vessel tag was useless. They fired me because vessel tag made it harder to lie. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was spiraling, because I was building. I pulled up my bank app and did the math in my head. What I had left, how long I could last, how cheap I could live if I cut everything that wasn't survival. Then I opened a blank document and wrote a name at the top. Vessel Tag Labs. It sounded ridiculous, like a kid naming a spaceship, but it made the idea feel like it had a spine. I filed an LLC online the next morning, not because I suddenly thought I was a founder. Because I understood something basic. If I was going to rebuild anything, I needed it to live in a structure that wasn't just me in an apartment with a laptop. I bought a cheap domain, set up an email, created a plain landing page with 3 sentences that said what the tool did, without bragging. A compliance-first dispute timeline for logistics operations. That's it. No hype. No revolutionize. No stock photo handshake. Just the promise of evidence. The rebuild itself was slow and ugly. I wasn't some genius programmer. I could write scripts, automate workflows, and understand systems. But I wasn't going to brute force a product in a week. So I did what I knew. I made the rebuild small. Instead of trying to recreate everything, I focused on the core. Stitching events into a timeline and generating a packet you could hand to a client without embarrassment. Every night, I worked until my eyes burned. Every morning, I applied for jobs anyway, because hope doesn't pay bills, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. And for a little while, it was almost peaceful. Then the first crack of Northline reached me. It was a message from Jessa, my old co-worker, the one who'd asked if I was okay the day my badge went red. She didn't waste words. "They're saying you took stuff," she wrote. I stared at the message, and my stomach did that slow drop thing like an elevator when you didn't expect movement. "Took what?" I typed back. A minute later, she replied, "Blaine told people you walked out with internal tools. He said legal is looking into it." I read it twice. Then I put my phone face down and sat still for a long moment, because I understood the move. If they could paint me as a thief, they could make everyone stop talking to me, stop hiring me, stop taking my calls. It was the corporate version of cutting off oxygen, and they were doing it early before I even had anything to show. I opened the folder on my desktop labeled Northline Exit. Inside were the boring things I'd saved without drama. HR meeting invite, separation paperwork unsigned, permission error screenshots, ticket exports, and one tiny scanned photo I'd taken with my phone. The receipt stub, date, item, vessel tag archive copy provided as is, donation amount, signature, $5. I stared at it and felt the anger sharpen into something cleaner. Not panic, not fear. A plan. I called a small business attorney that afternoon, the kind you find when you don't have money for a big firm and you're honest about it. He didn't promise miracles. He asked me questions in a flat voice, like he'd seen this movie before. "Do you have anything in writing that you acquired the asset legitimately?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "A receipt." "Do you have proof of the timeline? That you did not access systems after separation?" he asked. "I do," I replied. My access went red before I took anything. IT handed it to me in a hallway. I paid. It's documented. He paused. Then he said, "Good. Don't talk to them on the phone. No casual explanations. If they reach out, everything is email, and you keep every message." That evening, I drafted one email and saved it without sending. Subject: clarification of asset transfer. Vessel tag archive copy. It was short, polite, clinical. Not, "You ruined my life." Not, "You'll regret this." Just a record. I didn't send it because I didn't want to poke the bear yet. I didn't know how far Blaine was willing to go. And sometimes the smartest move is letting someone show their hand first. But I did one thing before bed. I backed up everything, my rebuild logs, my drafts, my documentation, and the receipt, into two separate places. One cloud, one physical drive. Then I printed the receipt. Not because I thought paper was magical, because something about holding it made it real. That was the night I stopped thinking of myself as the junior they pushed out, and started thinking like someone building an exit that couldn't be blocked by gossip. A week later, I got the first email that told me Northline wasn't wobbling. They were slipping. It wasn't from Blaine. It wasn't from HR. It was from a carrier operations contact I barely knew, a guy I'd spoken to maybe twice during escalation calls. Subject line: quick question. Do you still have that dispute tool? And I just stared at my screen, feeling that tight, quiet pulse behind my eyes. Because if vendors were reaching out, it meant the mess had already started spilling, and that was just the beginning. I didn't answer that carrier guy right away, not because I was playing games, because I knew what that email could turn into. If I replied too fast, too eager, it would look like I'd been waiting to profit off Northline's pain. And if Blaine was already telling people I took stuff, the last thing I needed was a trail that made me look like I'd been circling their clients like a vulture. So I did what I'd trained myself to do at Northline. I slowed down and checked the record. I opened my notes from the Marrowgate onboarding, what I still had anyway. Old dispute cases, carrier names, the specific lanes that were failing scans, the patterns vessel tag always caught before the dashboard executives liked. Then I opened my rebuild folder and looked at what I actually had. It wasn't a product yet. It was a working core, a stitched event timeline that could generate a clean dispute packet if you fed it the right data. It could prove sequence. It could highlight gaps. It could show custody handoffs, like a story that didn't change when someone got nervous. But it wasn't plug and play. Not even close. And I wasn't ready to throw it into the wild just because one guy asked a question. So I did something that felt painfully small. For someone who had just been erased, I wrote a careful reply. "Depends what you mean by dispute tool," I typed. "I'm rebuilding the system that can produce a defensible timeline. What issue are you seeing?" He answered within an hour. Missing scans, conflicting timestamps, customers demanding proof, Northline blaming the carrier blaming the warehouse, everyone blaming everyone. He added one line that made my throat tighten. Northline used to send packets that closed disputes fast. Now they send screenshots. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, because that wasn't a compliment. That was a funeral. The next few days were the hardest kind of quiet, not the peaceful kind. The kind where you're waiting for something to hit the floor and you can hear the silence collecting weight. I still applied for jobs. I still got the same polite rejections. I still watched my bank balance drop in slow motion. I still ate cheap food and told myself it was temporary. But every night, I rebuilt. And every night, the same thought kept showing up, ugly and persistent. If I don't finish this, they win twice. By the end of the week, I had my first real pilot opportunity. Not from a dream client, not from a boardroom, but from a small regional carrier that had heard about me through the ops grapevine. They weren't glamorous. They were stressed, understaffed, and losing money on disputes they couldn't control. The operations manager, a woman named Kavia Trent, didn't care about my story. She cared about outcomes. We met over a video call. Her camera was angled slightly down, like she didn't have time to set it up properly. Behind her were stacks of paper and a whiteboard full of scribbles that looked like someone fighting a war with markers. "I don't need pretty," she told me, blunt. "I need something that shows what happened without me begging 3 departments for it." I showed her the core. No branding, no pitch deck. Just an example timeline, event stitching, a packet output with timestamps and sources. She leaned closer to her screen like she couldn't help it. "Can it highlight missing scans?" she asked. "Yes." "Can it show when we took custody and when we didn't?" "Yes." "Can it stay consistent? Like if someone changes a note later, does it show the change?" I paused. "That depends on data access," I said. "But the system can track deltas if the source provides it. If it doesn't, we snapshot." Kavia nodded once, sharp. That's the first honest answer I've gotten in months. She didn't sign anything that day. She asked for a pilot scope, security basics, and a timeline. She acted like a real ops leader, not a fantasy investor. And for the first time since my badge went red, I felt something that wasn't anger. I felt traction. The pilot started small, a single lane, a single client, a defined set of disputes. I asked for minimal data and built the ingestion around what they could actually provide without chaos. For 2 weeks, I lived in that lane. Every exception was a puzzle. Every missing scan was a hole you had to patch with reality, not imagination. I logged everything. I versioned changes. I documented why the system concluded what it concluded. No miracles, just disciplined work. At the end of the second week, Kavia sent me a message at 6 in the morning. "Closed 7 disputes yesterday. Customers stopped arguing after the packet." 7 disputes. Not $7 million. Not some headline number. Just 7 cases that used to eat hours and now died quietly under evidence. I stared at the message and felt my eyes sting. Not because I was emotional in a movie way, because it was proof that I wasn't crazy for caring about boring truth. That same day, another email hit my inbox. Different sender, different tone. This one wasn't a carrier. It was a procurement address I recognized instantly, like a smell that pulls you back into an old room. Marrowgate Imports. My chest tightened before I even opened it. Subject line: question regarding proof of chain documentation. I read it once, then again. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't friendly either. It was cautious, professional, and written like someone who knew every sentence might be forwarded to legal. They said they were reviewing their vendor performance. They said they were exploring process improvements. They asked if I was available for a brief discussion about evidence packet generation and dispute defensibility. No mention of Northline by name, no accusation, no praise. Just a request that told me one thing clearly. They were bleeding. I didn't respond immediately. I opened a new document. and wrote down everything I knew about Marrowgate's contract requirements, based on memory and the cases I'd worked. I listed what I could offer without touching Northline's systems. I listed what I could not do. I listed what questions I needed answered to keep it clean. Then I called my attorney and asked one question. If a former customer contacts me, can I talk to them? He didn't hesitate. You can talk, he said. You cannot use confidential Northline information. You cannot represent that you're affiliated with Northline. You keep everything in writing. You keep it professional. And you do not insult anyone. You let documents do the work. That last line sat in my head for a long time. I replied to Marrowgate with a short answer. Yes, I could speak. I suggested times. I asked them to outline their needs in general terms, and confirmed I would only discuss solutions built independently. The next morning, I got a calendar invite. The attendee list was small: one procurement manager named Esme Ralston, one person from compliance, and a legal observer who didn't turn their camera on. Esme started the call the way you do when you don't want to sound desperate. We're evaluating options, she said. We've had inconsistencies. Inconsistencies. That word was doing heavy lifting. I kept my voice calm. What's the pain point? I asked. She didn't launch into a rant. She pulled up a document and shared her screen. It was a dispute log. Line after line. Missing scan proof. Conflicting delivery confirmations. Timestamps that didn't match. Evidence packets that looked like they'd been stitched together by someone who didn't understand chain of custody. This started becoming frequent, she said carefully, after a change in Northline's reporting process. I didn't react. I didn't say I knew why. I didn't say I told them so. I asked, what does your contract require for proof? Her compliance person answered, not Esme. A consistent timeline, source attribution, custody transitions, any discrepancies disclosed, not hidden. I nodded slowly. And what happens when it isn't provided? I asked. Esme's mouth tightened just a fraction. Penalties, she said, and termination rights if it becomes systemic. The legal observer's camera stayed off, but I felt their presence like a weight. I could have gone into sales mode then. I could have promised the world. I could have tried to sound like a founder instead of a junior who got pushed out. Instead, I told them the truth. I can generate a defensible timeline, I said. I can do it with the data you have access to. I can't fix Northline's operations. I can only fix how evidence is captured and presented. And I won't touch anything that belongs to them. Esme watched me for a long moment. Then she asked the question that snapped something inside me into focus. Why are you being this careful? She said. I didn't plan the answer. It came out flat and honest. Because when people panic, they start rewriting. And rewriting gets expensive. There was a pause after that. Not awkward, not dead. The kind of pause where someone hears what they already suspected, confirmed by a person who doesn't need to posture. Esme exhaled and looked down at her notes. We remember you, she said finally. Your name used to show up on the packets. And back then, disputes closed. My throat tightened, but I kept my face still. Because in that moment, I understood the whole arc with a clarity that hurt. Northline hadn't just removed me. They'd removed the part of the company that could prove anything. And now the bill for that decision was arriving. One dispute at a time. I ended the call the way I always ended escalations, cleanly. I'll send a pilot scope, I said. Limited lanes, defined data, defined outputs. If it works, you'll have proof. If it doesn't, you'll have a documented reason why. Esme nodded once. Send it, she said. And please, keep it formal. After the call, I sat in my chair and stared at my own reflection in the black screen of my laptop. I wasn't excited. I was scared in a very specific way. Because if Marrowgate was reaching out to me, it meant Northline was already in trouble. And if Northline realized Marrowgate was talking to the junior they erased, they weren't going to stay quiet. I didn't know it yet, But that next decision, how I framed that pilot, how I documented it, how I protected it, would cost them everything. The email from Esme at Margate came the next day. Short, formal, almost sterile. They wanted a pilot, 2 lanes, 30 days. Defined output, dispute packets that met their proof of chain clause. No promises about fixing operations, just evidence they could defend. They also copied in their legal observer this time, name visible now, Owen Brecht. That detail mattered. Because when legal attaches a name, it means the company has stopped hoping the problem will resolve itself quietly. I drafted the pilot scope like I was writing a contract for my own survival. What data they would provide, how it would be transmitted, how it would be stored, what I would produce, what I would not do, what I would not access. In one line I added on purpose. All tooling used is independently developed and does not rely on any proprietary Northline relay systems. I sent it. Then I waited, not in a dramatic way, in a calm, numb way like you're watching clouds darken and you know the storm is coming, whether you feel ready or not. It came faster than I expected. 2 days later, I received a message from an unfamiliar address with a subject line that looked like it had been written by someone trying to sound casual and failing. Just checking in. The sender was Celine from HR. But the tone wasn't HR, it was bait. She wrote that North Line wanted to clarify some items from my departure, that they were hearing rumors I had continued working with internal tools, that it was in everyone's best interest to clear it up quickly. At the bottom, she suggested a phone call. I stared at the screen and felt my jaw tighten, because it wasn't about clarity. It was about control. A phone call is where people say things they can later deny. It's where they ask questions in ways that make you answer wrong. It's where they try to trap you into admitting guilt just to end the discomfort. I forwarded the email to my attorney. Then I replied 1 sentence. Happy to address any questions in writing. Please specify exactly what you need clarified. No emotion, no sarcasm, no apology. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again, then again. Then a text appeared from another unknown number. Hi, Soren. It's Blaine. We should talk. My throat went dry, not because I was afraid of him personally, because I knew what kind of meeting he wanted. A private conversation where he could smear me with good intentions and then later claim I was uncooperative. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my folder, the one I'd built without telling anyone, the one with the receipt, the separation paperwork, the access cutoff timing, the emails, the rebuild logs, the folder that existed for one reason, so nobody could rewrite the story after the fact. Blaine didn't stop. That evening, another email arrived, this one from a Northline legal address. Subject: Notice of Intellectual Property Concern. My stomach went cold, not because I thought they were right, because I understood what a legal notice does even when it's weak. It makes people back away. It makes potential customers hesitate. It makes you waste time proving you didn't do something you never did. The letter accused me, carefully in that lawyer language that suggests guilt without committing to a claim, of retaining and utilizing Northline proprietary materials. They demanded I confirm in writing that I had not copied, retained, or used internal tools. They also asked me to identify any third parties I had communicated with regarding Northline systems. That last line wasn't about IP. It was phishing. They wanted to know who was talking to me. My hands stayed still on the keyboard. I didn't reply right away. I called my attorney again. He listened. Then he said, flat as concrete. They're not asking questions. They're building a narrative. You answer narrowly, you attach your proof, you do not volunteer names, and you do not get emotional. I drafted the response with him on the line. 3 paragraphs. 1. I had not accessed Northline's systems after my separation meeting. My badge access was disabled the same day. 2. I possessed an archive copy of an asset acquired through an internal surplus donation process, documented by receipt. Attached. 3. My current work is independently developed with dated version logs, and I would not discuss customers or third parties in response to an unsupported allegation. Then I attached the scan of the $5 receipt and hit send. After that, something changed. The next morning, Esme from Marrowgate emailed me. Northline asked whether we are speaking with you, she wrote. We did not confirm details. Please keep all communication formal. That was it. No reassurance, no panic. Just the calm warning of someone who has been through vendor conflict before and doesn't want to be collateral. I read that line twice and felt my heart start to thud harder, because it meant Blaine wasn't just trying to scare me, he was trying to cut me off at the source. I spent that day building the pilot environment, like I was setting up a courtroom exhibit. Every file hashed, every data transfer logged, access controls documented. Not because Marrowgate demanded it, because I could feel Northline's next move coming. When people lose control, they look for shortcuts, and shortcuts leave fingerprints. 2 weeks into the pilot, Marrowgate's disputes started closing. Not all of them, not magically, but consistently enough that the pattern was undeniable. Each packet had the same structure: timeline, sources, custody transitions, disclosed gaps. No hand-waving, no trust us. Just evidence. Esme didn't praise me. She didn't need to. Her responses got shorter, and that's how you know a solution is working in procurement. Fewer words means fewer problems. Then the procurement meeting was scheduled. Official. Vendor performance review. Northline invited. My name included as alternative vendor demonstration. The calendar invite alone told me Northline was in real trouble, because companies don't put you in the same room as their replacement unless they're bleeding. The day of the meeting, I wore the simplest thing I own: a plain button-down and black slacks. No startup costume. No pretending, just a guy who could show his work. The call opened with Northline's account director, speaking like someone reading from a slide he didn't believe in. We've implemented improvements, he said. We've tightened workflows. We're seeing stabilization. I could hear the smile in his voice. Then Marrowgate's compliance person spoke. Please provide a dispute packet for these 3 cases, she said, and pasted 3 case IDs into the chat. Northline paused. They asked for time. They said they didn't have the full chain due to carrier inconsistencies. They said they could provide screenshots and warehouse notes. Esme's legal observer, Owen, finally spoke. Your contract does not accept screenshots as proof of chain, he said. It requires a consistent timeline with source attribution. Northline's account director tried to pivot. That's what we're working toward, he said. And then Esme said my name. Soren, she said, can you show us how your packet would present these cases? My fingers didn't shake. I didn't smile. I opened my interface and loaded the cases using the data Marrowgate had already provided under the pilot. The timeline rendered. Custody handoff at the warehouse. Scan gap flagged. Driver event timestamp with location. Note added later with timestamp and source. Discrepancy disclosed. I clicked Generate Packet. A PDF output appeared with the full sequence. Clean, consistent, and defensible. No opinions, no accusations. Just the record. There was a pause after I shared it. Northline's account director went quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't technical difficulty. The kind that means you've run out of language. And then in the chat, someone from Northline typed, "Where did you get that system?" I didn't answer the way they wanted. I didn't explain my life story. I didn't mention the hallway. I didn't mention Blaine. I answered like a professional, because that's what wins in rooms like that. It's independently developed, I said. It's scoped to evidence generation. All inputs are provided by Marrowgate. Nothing is pulled from Northline. Owen spoke again, calm and lethal. So Northline cannot provide contract-compliant proof, but an independent system can, using the same base operational data. Northline's account director tried one last move. "We have concerns about IP," he said, voice tight. Esme didn't even look at him. She looked at Owen. Owen replied, "We have reviewed the pilot scope. We will evaluate vendors based on performance and contract compliance." That's when I saw it, the moment the conversation stopped being about improvements and became about liability. Northline wasn't losing a client because they were unlucky. They were losing a client because they could no longer prove what they promised. And when a company can't prove it, the story becomes, who made it impossible to prove? After the meeting, I got an email from Northline's legal address again. This one had a different tone, less accusation, more desperation. They asked if I would consider licensing discussions. They asked if I would be open to a mutually beneficial resolution. They didn't mention theft. They didn't mention misconduct. They didn't mention Blaine. They just wanted the thing they'd laughed at. I stared at that email for a long time. Then I opened a blank reply. I kept it short. I told them I was willing to discuss licensing, but only in writing, only with defined terms, and only with acknowledgement that my system was independently developed. Then I added one line that felt like a door closing softly instead of slamming. Please include the decision maker who has authority to execute an agreement. Because Blaine wasn't the decision maker. He was the reason they were here. I sent the email, and for the first time since my badge went red, I felt the situation tilt. Not toward chaos, toward consequence. I learned something in that stretch. Power loves vague language. Process hates vagueness. If you keep your receipts, your emails, your timestamps, you don't need to win arguments. You just need to show the record. That night, my phone lit up again. Unknown number. I didn't answer. I watched it ring until it stopped, because I already knew what Blaine was about to do next. When people realize they can't bury the truth, they try to bury the person holding it. And he wasn't done. The next morning, the unknown number didn't call. Instead, I got an email from Blaine. Not from his company address, from a personal one. That alone told me he knew the official channels weren't safe for what he wanted to say. Subject line, "Let's end this." The message was short, written like he was doing me a favor. He said Northline wanted to resolve things privately. He said I'd made my point. He said if I kept going, I'd burn bridges in the industry. He offered a contractor role and implied the licensing conversation could go smoothly if I cooperated. There was no apology, no accountability, just a threat wrapped in friendly punctuation. I forwarded it to my attorney and didn't respond. I didn't need to respond because Blaine had already done something more useful than he realized. He had stepped out of the professional record. People like him always do eventually. They can't help it. They think rules are for other people. And when they do, it stops being your word against theirs. It becomes their own words. Printed. That afternoon, Northline's legal team sent a calendar invite titled Licensing Discussion. 2 attendees from legal, 1 from procurement, and, strangely, Blaine. I declined the invite and replied by email only. Happy to discuss licensing. Please remove non-essential attendees and confirm this meeting is for commercial terms, not employment matters. I will not discuss prior HR events in a licensing call. They didn't like that. Within an hour, legal replied, Blaine is essential. My attorney's response was one line, then we will not attend. That's when I saw the real shape of it. They weren't trying to license my system. They were trying to pull me into a room where Blaine could steer the conversation back into his comfort zone. Emotion, intimidation, ambiguity, where he could push me to say something sloppy and later claim I admitted wrongdoing. So I did the only thing that makes people like Blaine nervous. I turned it into a process. I sent Northline a written term sheet draft. Not fancy, not inflated, just clean. A non-exclusive license for evidence generation, limited scope, no transfer of ownership, no restrictions on my other customers, and a clear statement. The software is independently developed, and Northline waives allegations related to continued use of internal tools in exchange for commercial licensing. That last clause wasn't petty. It was necessary. If they wanted to buy what I built, they couldn't keep one foot on my neck while they did it. Legal went quiet for 2 days. Then I received an email from someone I didn't expect. Northline's general counsel, named Maura Kensley. Her tone was different from everyone else. Not warm, not threatening. Just direct. Soren, she wrote, we are reviewing the matter. Please provide copies of any documentation regarding your acquisition of the archived asset. I didn't gloat. I didn't preach. I sent her the receipt again, the date, the description, the donation amount, the signature. I also attached a simple timeline. Separation meeting, morning, badge access disabled, late afternoon, asset acquired through surplus process, after badge disabled, documented with IT witness, independent development logs, dated entries starting the same week, no opinions, just facts. Maura replied an hour later, understood. That was the first time in months I felt something like relief, not victory, not revenge. Relief, because relief is what you feel when the adult finally walks into the room. 3 days later, Esme from Marrowgate emailed me. Marrowgate has issued notice of termination to Northline, she wrote. We are proceeding with vendor transition to your solution, pending final paperwork. I read it once and my hands went cold. Then I read it again, slower, and felt my chest loosen like a belt unbuckling. Northline had lost them, not because I stole anyone, because Northline couldn't meet their own contract requirements, because they chose optics over evidence, because someone decided the tool that made proof easy was worthless. A week after that, something else happened, something that made the ending feel less like karma and more like consequence. Maura called my attorney, not me, him. And when attorneys call each other directly, it usually means they want the conversation to stay factual. She proposed a licensing agreement on terms very close to mine, except one missing line. No waiver, no written acknowledgement that the software was independent, just a license with vague language that would let them keep whispering IP concern in the background. My attorney sent back one sentence. No waiver, no deal. 2 hours later, Maura added the waiver. That's when I knew Blaine had lost control of the narrative inside his own company. Because legal doesn't concede like that unless they've seen something that scares them more than a licensing fee. And I found out what it was the following Monday. Jessa messaged me again, short, the way people text when they're afraid messages might be read. Board meeting today, she wrote. Blaine got pulled in. I didn't ask how she knew. I didn't ask for gossip. I just replied, okay. An hour later, she sent one more message. They're saying Marrowgate's termination triggered a review. They pulled old dispute packets. They noticed the quality drop started right after you left. I stared at that line and felt something settle. Not joy, not vengeance, a quiet kind of justice that doesn't need fireworks. Because if they reviewed the old packets, they would also see something else. The pattern of how Vessel Tag had been treated, the way it had been archived, the way it had been mocked, the way Blaine had framed simplicity as strategy. And if the board was involved, it meant the damage was now big enough that someone had to answer for it. 2 weeks later, the licensing agreement was executed, not a handshake, not a celebratory lunch. A signed document with clauses that protected me and limited them. Northline got access to my system under strict scope. I got paid properly. Marrowgate moved fully into my platform. Cavia's carrier expanded their pilot into a subscription. 2 smaller carriers followed after they heard disputes were closing without drama. My bank account stopped bleeding. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, I got an automated email from Northline's HR portal. It looked like the kind of thing they forget to turn off. Organizational update. I opened it and scrolled. Blaine Harker, separated. No explanation, no apology, just a line in a list. I sat back in my chair and stared at my wall for a long time. And because that's what consequence looks like in corporate life. Not screaming, not a public confession, just a door that closes and doesn't reopen. That night, I took the original $5 receipt out of my folder and held it in my hands. The paper was thin. The ink was slightly faded. It didn't feel like a trophy. It felt like a reminder. They didn't lose because I was louder than them. They lost because they treated proof like a nuisance, and they treated the person who kept proof alive, like disposable labor. And when you do that long enough, eventually you end up in a room where your charm doesn't matter. Only the record does. I keep that receipt now in a small drawer beside my desk. Not because I'm sentimental, because it marks the exact moment my life split into two versions. The version where I waited to be picked, and the version where I built something no one could erase. If you're ever in a place where they tell you your work is too detailed, where they call your receipts overkill, where they try to make you feel small for caring about the record, listen carefully. That's not feedback. That's a warning. Because the day they decide you're not a fit might be the same day they hand you the asset that changes everything. And if they laugh while they do it, let them. Sometimes $5 is the cheapest price you'll ever pay for your freedom.